Hello, everyone, and welcome to our conversation for Let's Talk About. My name is Jaleesa Dallas, Program Manager for our recognized student organizations here at the University in Phoenix. And today we're having an honest conversation about refreshing your career in the new year. I don't know if you're ready, but I'm ready. Today, we're answering your questions on this topic and sharing about reviewing your career goals, taking inventory of your skills, refreshing your resume, and growing your value. Now, we have some special guests. Some you've seen before, some are new. We have Jamie Johnson, we have Lisa Severy, we have Lacey Baker, who are our University of Phoenix career advisors, and then we have Marshall McCauley, University of Phoenix Director of Student Services. Now, we're going to get this started with one of our career advisors, Jamie. She's going to give us some details and some really good things about career goals and dreams. Jamie?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. So great to see you in the beginning of this year. It's hard to believe we're already going into February now. But as we start talking about what this year will bring, I want to share with you a couple of things that I found really important to think about as we begin this year and as we begin the process of making 2023 the best year ever. Number one, when I'm working with my students and alum, I think about where are you in the process? And as we start this new year, everybody thinks about what are my new year resolutions? I want to lose that weight. I want to get that new certificate. I want to take a trip. We think about those things, but what about your career? Where are you in the process? And what steps are you taking to move in that direction? So, number one, let's talk about what are your career goals and what are you thinking about your goals and dreams? I like to include because it's just as important to dream and where are you in the process? Short term, 3 months, 6 months, a year, long term, the next 5 years, the next 10 years. Start going back, reflecting as you go through this process and begin to think about where are you and what do you really want to accomplish. It's hard to believe sometimes we don't know where we're going to go unless we have a plan, we have an idea. I always think about Alice in the Looking Glass, Lewis Carroll's character, when she's faced with the Cheshire Cat and she's trying to figure out what path to take. And as the Cheshire Cat says to her, well, that depends where you want to get to. So let's think about where do we want to get to? And one of the ways we can do that is start putting down specifics, goals, and objectives to get there. And sometimes in this time and day when we're so busy, we don't always take time to reflect and think, are we accomplishing what we want to do? So my next step in this process of when you create goals and dreams and are thinking about where you want to go is take the time for you to stop, reflect, perhaps set up a weekly meeting with yourself with your cup of coffee or tea. I love a good cup of coffee, whatever that looks like, and sit down and reflect. Where am I? What do I want to accomplish this week? What about this month? What about next 3 months, 6 months? And check in where you are. Start thinking about the process. Perhaps a journal is a great way. I've used a journal in the past, and I found when I wrote what I wanted to accomplish, just recently I went back and looked. I had accomplished everything I had written down because I had made the effort for myself to think about where I wanted to go. And it's like there's this unconscious process that begins that helps you start moving toward where you want to go. The second thing I'd like to share with you is we talk about relationships a lot in the job search. I'd like to put it in terms of not just what we call networking from a career perspective, but community. Where are you with your community and how are you building and keeping your community strong? We know that from experience, and the statistics show people land opportunities by finding connections. In fact, since especially COVID, I've noticed in the past 2 years, every client I've worked with, every student, alumni I've been working with, they've been finding opportunity through some kind of connection. Either they knew somebody or somebody they knew somebody. Now, I don't want you to think about it just in terms of I'm going to find a connection to get a job. I want you to think about this in terms of I'm building colleagues, I'm building relationships, and I'm looking for people as part of my my personal and professional community, not just networking. It's true. You get involved, people get to know you, and they remember you. That I just worked with a student recently who had an opportunity because she knew somebody at the company and they recommended her. So not just for that purpose, but think about long term and how you're going to build a long term community. Second, in that is what about you? What about building and giving to that community? How can you begin to be a part of the community? Well, one of the ways I know is giving back. And that can come from many different forms. For example, if you're a part of a professional association or a student group right now, a leadership group, how are you giving back to that group? For example, I'm in a professional association for my state through career development, and I'm actually a part of the board here in my state. I'm also going to present at our local conference this year in March. It's one of the ways I can give back to those that work with me that are in my group, in my community. What about you? What about your local community? How can you build and serve and give back? So, as you start to think about this coming year and what you want to accomplish, number one, let's go back and reflect, review, renew, and explore where we are with our career goals and dreams and see if we're on track with where we want to go. And number two, let's keep our community strong and build it so as we move forward in the future, not only just for this year, 2023, but for beyond, that we're on track, we're in process for where we want to go, and we're creating opportunity now and for the future. Well, that's my part, Jaleesa. Thank you so much. Uh,
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. It's funny that you mentioned journaling to be reflective and doing self inventory because I literally did that this morning and guessed what I said I was grateful for community. So, thank you so much for your share. I think it's going to be amazing. And for those who are taking notes, make sure you jot those good things down. So, next, we're going to hear from Lisa, and she's going to tell us a little bit about taking inventory of your skills specifically. Lisa?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to be here and to join this community online. I think we all know that the job market right now is nuts. Many of us have been working with students in different settings for years, and to me, this is the craziest I've seen it. So, really, recruiters and employers are looking for three key pieces. They're looking for education, they're looking for experience, and they're looking for skills. And the first two are the ones we tend to focus on. But really, more and more employers are coming around to the idea that that if I just post for one major, or I just post for people with a certain number of years of experience, I may not get my needs met in terms of what skills people bring to the table. So they're actually writing, I think everybody in general is doing a better job of writing job descriptions that actually focus on the skills that they need from someone to be able to do the job that they have. So on the flip side, then, it's helpful for candidates to do the same thing. To first of all start by inventorying your skills. It's amazing when I'm talking to a student and I ask them about their skills, maybe they come up with two or three. But if they take the time between our sessions to actually sit down and think about every class they've had and what they learned in that class, every job that they've had from when they worked in fast food at 16 years old, and those customer service skills that you develop in those settings. And by the time we meet again, they have a whole list, which hopefully is building their confidence as well as helping them to think about jobs that they may qualify for. So then the question is, okay, but how do I know exactly what I should be putting on a resume or articulating in an interview? What skills do I need? Which is the second part of the equation. So I like to have students go in and find, say, 5 jobs that they really like and want to go into. They could be jobs that are very applicable to what they're doing. They could be stretch goals. But to generate from that a second list, it's like reverse engineering to figure out where the gaps are so that someone can see, all right, here's my list of skills. Here's what employers in this field are looking for. So then the third piece is to bridge the gap. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, which is really fun. Now, LinkedIn has LinkedIn Learnings programs. Google has learning programs, Coursera. Phoenix has a whole professional development toolkit that is building. So all of those things would be great places to start. But there's also project work that you do as part of your education. So you can think about any new projects that maybe you could do even independently to build those skills. As Jamie mentioned, professional associations are great ways to build skills. So that's a twofer, so that you could both be building your professional community and be building out your skill set. So that's wonderful too. There are boot camps that focus on very specific skill sets if you need to draw on those. Also, as Jamie mentioned, there's a ton of certifications from institutions of higher ed through, again, private things like Google or Coursera that you can take a look at to build up those certifications. And of course, as I mentioned, there's always experience. And most people think of that in terms of jobs, but there's also volunteering, internships or co-ops, part-time work, and of course full-time work. But all of those are also ways to build up your skill set so that eventually, if you focus on it, your list of skills and the needed list of skills from an employer match up. Hopefully that's helpful, and I'll toss it back to Jaleesa.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. I really do love the part about being connected, a common theme that we're finding already in this conversation. And for those who want connection, classroom is one place, but also co-curricular activities like our recognized student organizations and those outside within your professional arena. Thank you so much, Lisa, for that inventory of skills. Lacey, we're going to turn it over to you to give us some details on refreshing your resume.
Hi. Yeah, thanks. And thank you everyone for joining. I do have some tips I think will be helpful and, things you can implement today. The biggest thing is if you think there may be a change coming for you in terms of job search or, just wanting to transition or pivot, the time to refresh the resume is now while you're, currently employed ideally. Of course, we know life happens, but I have 4 ways in 2023 to refresh your resume. The first is tracking your measurable accomplishments at your current role. So similar to what Lisa was saying, being able to actually think through what you've accomplished can really be helpful when you're updating the resume. And so I suggest even having a list of things at the end of each week that you've accomplished and finished up. That can be really helpful when you're wanting to quickly update the resume. Also, updating the resume, periodically can really be helpful. Some people like to update it when there's a big life event, a promotion, or when they're, finishing up their school. However, it's really helpful to probably update it a little bit more frequently. And sometimes people put it in their calendar, for a monthly reminder to go in and add some skills, add some things that they've accomplished in the last little bit. And I think that's a good strategy. But, find what works for you. Another way is to think about how to update the resume if you haven't in a while. So if you have a template that's, 10 or so years old, just be sure it has the typical best practice areas that we suggest now for resumes, which are summary, skills, experience in education and certificates. So if you have those 4 areas, you're probably doing good. But the other thing to keep in mind with that is also length. So if you have the right length for your professional level right now. So 1 to 2 pages is pretty good for general workers. When you start to get to 3 pages, you really should be C-level, CEO type of, level. And of course, that's a little bit different if you're applying to federal, because those need to be as long as necessary to get the information in there that they require. But basically, keep it to 2 pages max, for most jobs, and you should be in a good spot. And that kind of feeds into the next, idea, which is some common issues that you can change to, increase and refresh that resume. One is to remove unneeded work history. So if you have 10 plus years on the resume, generally speaking, it can be helpful to kind of go through and take that off. Now, especially starting in 2023, going back to 2013, seeing if there's anything that kind of goes beyond that and, start to take that off to save some space. Also, any outdated formatting issues. So if it's hard to copy into online systems, that's usually a sign that you have a template that's an issue. If you find it's hard for you to edit it in a Word doc or something like that, it's probably best to maybe start over, find a new template, one that's kind of a little bit simpler. And then also, if it has anything that's kind of a holdover from an older version of a resume, so an objective statement, for example, is now replaced with that summary, and having references to your references really isn't a helpful, thing anymore. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And then lastly, I just want to talk about one myth that, individuals tend to find, I find on individuals' resumes pretty commonly, which is that they think that they cannot add a certificate or education until they've completely finished it. And I always say, hey, put it on there when you start it and just have an expected graduation date, because then you're going to get that. Credit for finishing up or actively learning towards some skills and development, which employers like to see. And so I would suggest putting it on there as soon as you can and just have that expected graduation date. That's kind of a way to be clear that it's ongoing. But those are my, kind of quick tips. Hopefully it's helpful. But I will, turn it back to Julissa. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lacey. One thing that I have to do, and I appreciate you sharing, is that I need to be regularly updating my resume with measurable skills, because that's one thing that I think has been a challenge, I think, for a lot of people, how to measure my progress and my growth over time. So if you haven't already scheduled your appointment for a career advisor, I think you should do that. And Marshall, we have you talking about growing our value. Please give us the details.
All right. Well, good morning. Thank you so much, Delisa. I think already this morning we've heard some great feedback. We've heard some great conversation around how do you look for that next opportunity, that next great piece that's going to move your career forward. I wanted to talk about something a little bit different, though. I want to talk about how do you think about growing your career from the perspective of growing your value in your current role, whatever that is, however you are making a living, whatever employer, whether you're self-employed, whether you're working for an employer, what's the value that you bring to work every day? So we might think about it like the first value is the most basic, right? Which is your time. You're giving up your life and you're spending it working on the problems of your employer. But often you'll find that just showing up will only get you so far in terms of career growth. More important are the value of the skills, the competencies, and the experience that you can bring to solving your employer's problems. So you think of that collection of problems and the skills that you use to solve them is what generally makes up your current job. But if you think about it, a career is more than that, right? A career is not just that current role, but also the path that you want to walk. Where do you want to go, how you get there, and the impact that you want to have along the way. So if you're focused on career growth, you want to grow your value. We've heard some great stuff about acquiring skills, competencies, education, and experience. Those are all excellent ways to increase that value. And there are a lot of different ways to get those. But what I wanted to talk about today is how can you grow that value right now within your current role with one simple question? So the question is, what problem is blank trying to solve? I know blank seems a little vague, so let's see if we can fill it in a bit. One approach to the blank that you will often hear from business consultants is, what problems are my clients trying to solve? So for them, knowing the problem creates an opportunity to provide solutions through innovation, efficiency, or maybe a new business strategy. And if that solution works, the clients will keep coming back to them and they'll keep in business. So consultants, tech companies, and really the leadership within any organization spend a lot of time trying to answer that question. So where does that fit in with your career? Well, you can use this same powerful question to create value in your current job. Ask yourself, what problem is your supervisor trying to solve right now? What problem is your coworker trying to solve? I'll go through the list of the things you know. Are there customer complaints? Are sales down? Are sales booming and you need to hire? Is there a process or a product that doesn't work well? Maybe a disagreement with a stakeholder or with a vendor even. If it's in education, is there a student that's struggling to learn? If you have a virtual role, a team that's struggling to be cohesive while they're working from home. So it's not important that these are the biggest problems that your organization or that those people face. They don't have to be the ones that keep them up at night or create a lot of stress. And it's also not critical that you have solutions right away. In fact, hold off on coming up with solutions to those problems for as long as you can in this exercise. What is critical is that you put yourself in others' shoes, that you look at the workplace from another's perspective and think through their constraints. How are they balancing time and resources to get their job done? What do they consider every day when trying to solve their problems? Why might one type of solution be more difficult to implement than another? What stakeholders do the solutions need to satisfy? So pick a person, a boss, a coworker, a client, a student, and write down a few of the problems that you know that they're trying to solve. Now pick somebody else and do it again. And keep focused on areas that you have a lot of information on. Someone that you work with closely enough to have a good sense for what they do, but don't be too restrictive on the type of problem, because it could be a people problem, it could be a process problem, or it could be a product problem. And don't be shy to just ask directly. What problem are they trying to solve? What's keeping you up at night, or what are you focused on? And most people are happy to talk about their work challenges. The fun part is once you look at those problems to solve and ask yourself, which of those do I have a unique perspective on from my current role, from my skills, from my education, or my experience? If you're doing this right, you won't have full solutions for a lot of the problems you identify. And that's okay. But you might just have a piece of information, a technique, a perspective, or a skill that can help someone else solve a work problem they're struggling with. And over time, offering that little bit of value can add up to a lot. It could even add up to a whole career. Thanks so much for letting me join. Hand it back to you, Jaleesa.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marshall, and our panelists. Marshall, those were some really great gems that I hope our listeners have been taking notes about. And now we have the opportunity for you to participate and give us a little bit about some of the questions that you might have concerning this topic about renewing your career in the new year. And so, great, we have a question from Shannon, and it reads, why is it important to have both short-term goals and long-term goals? I think this is an open question for most of us.
I'd be happy to start since I kind of talked about it earlier. Oh, I don't know if I saw Lisa raised her hand too. But I was going to say, how are you going to get there? I always think I go back to Lewis Carroll's story and Alice in Wonderland when she was faced with all these different paths and she didn't know where to go. And the whole point was, well, where are you going? And that's what the gift is of having goals, because goals and objectives can help you spell step by step the process it's going to take. So I want to accomplish to get my degree. And you sit down and you work through, what are the classes I need to take? When will I take them? What, what's the process of it will take to get there at the end of whatever the time is, whether it's a year, 2 years, etc. And then you have specifics you're going to accomplish. So the short term is, I have to take this class, you know, and the long term is, I need to take this program, right? So you've got specifics, you've got specific classes you need to take, and you have specific a big picture of where you're going. And it's the same with career. I want to become an HR specialist. Well, what would that take to be certified, for example, within an organization like SHRM? There's a series of classes I need to take. I need to have these classes educationally behind me. And you can start to see what it would take. And by the end of the process, whether it's a year, 2 years, etc., you have specific goals. So what's nice about the goals is, even if things change, sometimes we get off track, we don't end up going where we want to go. It gives us a pathway, a roadmap, if you'd like to use, so that we know how to get there both short term and long term.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. Lisa, did you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, this question has a lot to do with personality type. Like, some of us are really big picture thinkers, and so we know this is what I want to be doing when I want to retire. and other folks are very focused on, okay, I'm finishing my degree and I need employment now. Like, I need to start that income. And so the open door is to actually flip your thinking a little bit. So if I'm a very big picture thinker and I'm thinking long term, then I need to think about, okay, but what actual steps do I need to take to get there? I'm not particularly good at that. But again, folks that are focused on, okay, I need a job by Monday, also need to be thinking about the big picture. So I think it's an opportunity with both short-term goals and long-term goals to really think about how they go together, so that you can accomplish both.
Yes, I definitely agree, Lisa. I think that's a major, major reason why you need to seek career advisement. I can't press that enough because they're going to help you to see the big vision of who you want to be, what do you want to be doing, and then at the end of the day, what do you want to have as a result of that. Thank you so much, Shannon, for your question. We really do appreciate it. Next, we have Aaron. Any networking tips for beginners? I know Lisa talked about getting connected and building on those skills. Maybe you can take the first.
Yeah, yeah. So it's an interesting question, and this certainly became more complicated during COVID, and still as people are separating. Certainly at a university where students and alumni are spread out all over the planet, that can make it a little bit more complicated, but it also creates more opportunities. So, if you do have opportunities to do in-person meetups and things like that, phenomenal. That's great. But more likely now, it's using connections through, for example, the University of Phoenix LinkedIn page, or communicating through Facebook, like making those communities. And I do. I'm not shy, but I am an introvert. So it takes extra effort for me to connect with community members. And so for me, as Jamie was talking about, getting involved in some of those organizations and really giving myself a meaning and purpose to be there, not just to sort of show up, but actually to be involved. That really helped me to build my professional community and my professional family, which sounds kind of funny, but I think of networking as kind of this sort of clinical word that's like, a task you have to achieve. But when you're really talking about, once a year I get to see Jamie in person at a professional development conference, it's amazing. And that connection lasts all year. And so whether we actually saw each other in person or not, I have that connection to her because of our shared meaning and purpose of what we do and how we connect to each other. Lacey and I started on the very same day. So we have that connection and always will, and went through that training process and, all of the anxiety of a new job. So that was really fun, and we're bonded over that. So I think as many opportunities for you as you do with your home life, quote unquote, to build that community, build that family is really helpful. And so, yeah, you don't have to start with much. It's just reaching out to someone. Maybe there's an alum in your field that you can just contact through LinkedIn, and ask, do you have a couple minutes to answer a few questions via email? Very low ask in terms of that person's time, but you never know how long that connection will last for you. So just taking those little steps, not high risk, but little steps as a beginner can be really helpful.
Lisa, if I could add something to that,
Yes, for
I would
sure.
just suggest in looking through some of the comments that people are talking about, there are a variety of ways to do this. And I'd bring it back to that thought of how am I either offering value to somebody else? Like a lot of times we think of networking as just introducing myself and you're asking for something from them. And oftentimes, some of the best networking you can do is to offer them some value, participate in a venue. People have talked about community and getting involved in different organizations. But at its core, that's about offering value. Like, I can do something for you. Would you like that? What's a problem that you're trying to solve? By the same token, that kind of helps if you are asking for value in a specific way, right? Just going and saying somebody, hey, can you help me with my career, is oftentimes going to get a kind of a confused response. But if you have a problem that you're trying to solve, asking for that specific piece of value can really open up the doors for them to say, okay, this is how I've done that in the past in my career. Here's how I did it. And they'll be able to offer something there. So again, being specific in either offering value or asking for value in an open and transparent way will go a long way in that networking arena.
And I would just like to add, we have resources too that you can access through the Phoenix Link Network. We have an informational interviewing list. It's a guide there you can take advantage of. It's even through the My Phoenix blog, through the career resource tools, and it actually gives you specific questions so that you have something to share with them about. Like, tell me about, how did you get started? Uh, you know, what would you suggest for somebody like myself who wants to go toward this particular field? So that gives you a language to talk with them. And then also, just to add, I remember when I was first starting in my master's program many years ago, I went to a conference and I was sitting in the audience for a presenter, and they had a camera, and I just happened to know how to use the cameras, and the speaker needed somebody to help with the camera. And so I said, "Well, I know how to do it." So I just got up and helped. I ended up meeting somebody very famous in my field, John Crumbolts. He was being interviewed, and I got to meet him, and I knew him for the rest of my professional life with him, as he recently passed away just a couple of years ago. But I had that opportunity to get to know him, and he would even recognize me when I go to conferences after that one moment of getting to just jump in and be a volunteer. So don't be afraid to step out. Part of networking is reaching out. Like, they were both, Lisa, and I just blanked out your name. I'm so sorry.
Marshall.
Marshall. I'm so sorry, Marshall. That's what happens. You get nervous, right? You start talking and you forget, but it's okay. We just keep going forward. But as Marshall and Lisa said, the best thing we can do is just step forward and test the waters and not be afraid and reach out to give, and you'll be surprised what can happen.
If
I know this question's gone a long way, but I just see some great comments in there. Talking to one of our audience members around, how do you do that? How do you get your foot in the door? And it's like, go sideways a little bit. If you're trying to go through the door all the time, like, sometimes you'll run into those barriers that I think many of us have experienced throughout our career. Well, what you're hearing there about going out of community and place like, go sideways, go and talk to somebody in a related field that is where you're not asking them for a job, but you're offering something to them, their time or a little bit of weird expertise around cameras that you can do. I mean, those things are really meaningful and build those connections that will help open those doors where it's a more organic thing. Sorry, Julissa.
no, I definitely agree. And I just, in kind of summation of what you all have shared, just thinking about maybe like three tiers of social capital. You have someone you help, you have someone that's your peer, and then you have someone that you aspire towards or is inspiring to you. And just making sure you catch all of those, because maybe in those connections you might be able to build an even more solid foundation of a network. So thank you everyone for sharing. I think that might be another topic for Let's Talk About. And thank you, Erin, for your question. Our next question is from Rachel, I believe that's pronounced. Once you have one professional job pertaining to one's degree, is it okay to take off previous history unless it matches? This one looks like it's a question for Lacey.
Yeah, so it depends. If you can make it related, I think it's good to leave it on there. It also depends on if it's, 20 years in the past versus, 5 years ago, that sort of thing. But I think if you can, have transferable skills from that past role, it's okay to leave it on there, especially if you don't have a lot of experience in your current field. So it's kind of a tough one. It depends, but basically, if you can get value out of it, you can highlight those transferable skills. I think it is okay to leave it on there. I would just, I would think about taking it off if it's a little bit of an older experience. It doesn't really add much to what you've been doing the last 10 years. Anyone else have thoughts?
Yeah, I would just jump in and say I completely agree. And at this point, because we know recruiters are looking at resumes so quickly, most everything I read is somewhere, anyway, it's less than 10 seconds. So, the front page especially is prime real estate. Anything on the second or third page, people may scroll down to that, maybe not. So that's how I like to sort of think about I think most every experience is applicable. I mean, at a minimum, things like customer service and working as part of a team and those sorts of pieces. So I think if you're careful about how you craft things, then everything's relevant. But you also want to save that prime real estate on the front page for something that's a little bit more applicable. So yeah, I agree. It kind of depends. Might be good to talk over with someone. But if there's space for it, then yeah, I think you can make most everything applicable.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lacey and Lisa. And Rachel has another question. What's the best advice when you get into a role with no predecessors available to help mentor? That's a good one.
Maybe I think this is one that I was thinking of when giving some of our previous answers, but I think that that's a great opportunity for professional associations, for prior mentors in other roles. I think oftentimes we get into a role in a particular organization, and unless you get to sometimes you don't recognize that it's still valid to reach out to prior employers, to peers at other places, to mentors in those other roles. Again, getting back to that idea of asking for a little bit of value of how do I solve this problem, especially when you're in the role and they can see that maybe you've gotten a promotion or you're stepping into a new role, and you don't have a predecessor available to help kind of guide the way. Also asking people at the new employer who maybe worked with that person, what were some of the things that they did. Those are some things that I can think about.
And just also off the top of my head, just considering maybe what business or employee resource groups that may be available, because it could be someone within different communities that could help support your transition that might be a little bit more familiar, or you might find two individual people who have maybe your position combined, and so it's nice to get some resources from those folks connected. So thank you so much, Rachel, for your questions. We really truly appreciate it. Our next question is from Jake. What's the best way for me to add new skills to my resume?
Definitely a good question. I mean, the skills section is great because it's right at the top usually, so you can include information that's really relevant and can quickly be, scanned by a recruiter or hiring manager. Kind of like Lisa was saying, you only get, less than 10 seconds usually to kind of be in the yes or no pile sometimes, and then they kind of go further in depth once they've kind of looked at it at the other resumes. So that's a good starting point, but I would also say be sure that you're putting skills in your experience as well, because employers do like to see proof of those skills. So if it's a skill that you picked up in a class, having a coursework section can be helpful. Just basically having receipts on the resume of where you kind of have applied a skill can be helpful. But getting them on initially, that's what a skill section is really for, to highlight the relevant ones to the job that you're applying for. So to be sure you're tailoring and taking off ones that are less applicable. But then again, showing that, you have experienced the skills that you have on the resume. You've worked through that in some way in the experience section, if at all possible, or like I said, through a coursework section or something like that. Anyone else have thoughts or suggestions?
Lacey, I just love your frame of have a receipt for it somewhere on your resume. That's perfect, because some people, I think, go a little bit overboard and have a skills section that has 32 skills posted in it, and nobody's going to read through all that. Same thing, recruiters are just overwhelmed. They're going really fast, and so if they see a huge list, they're not. But if they see, 6, maybe 8 core skills that match perfectly to the job description, then yeah, that makes their life easy. Yes, pile right away, and they'll look at it further. So yeah, if you can sort of back that up by here's the course, here is the experience I had where I use this skill every day, then that again makes it a lot easier for the reader, which is the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and just referring back to what Lacey mentioned is making sure that you're tracking the measurable accomplishments. And if you're tracking them well, you don't have to put a bajillion skills on there because it will effectively articulate what you've done, how you've done it, and how you've been successful. Thank you so much, Lisa and Lacey. And thank you, Jake, for your question. Our next question is from Ashley. Creating a 5-year career plan is intimidating, kind of like what Lisa mentioned before. Where should I start?
I'd like to answer that. when we talk about a 5-year plan, what does that mean? And sometimes you'll get those questions when you're being interviewed. Where do you see yourself 5 to 10 years from now, right? And you go, well, I don't know. I think I know where I want to be, right? But the truth is, sometimes we may start out, I want to accomplish and become an accountant, then I'm going to be a CPA or going to get my MBA, correct? We think in those terms. But so let's start with the beginning. So, what's the original goal that you want to accomplish? And then in that original goal, for example, so I want to become a CPA. What would it take to get there? I get my accounting degree, I take the courses, you start to plan it out. So, first of all, find out number one, what it takes to get there, right? Then, number two, what about when you talk about a 5-year plan? Um, do you have an idea about where you want to live? Do you have an idea about what you want to accomplish financially? Do you want to have ideas about what you want to accomplish personally as far as goals and places? Like I had somebody I was working with once, their goal was to live in South Lake Tahoe. And they were living in the San Francisco area, and their goal was within 5 years, they wanted to be living on the lake, purchase a home and get themselves established. So they had a specific goal. So the first thing is begin with the end in mind. Where do you want to start for yourself personally? And then step and break it down. Talk to people who are doing that kind of goal. Like, for example, if you ultimately want to have your own business, perhaps going to SCORE or the local small business development center and talk to people who have accomplished that. What would it take? They have actual plans that you can follow. Talk to your professors, find out what they would suggest if you're looking for a specific field or area. It depends on where you're going, but think about it in terms of what I want to accomplish now, and then start to visualize. I've been to where I've been to groups where we've exercised and we sat down and we did like a vision board. Actually, we created a board and we did a collage and we cut out magazines. Some people do it electronically, but you'd be surprised. And then find out what would it take to get there. I did a vision board once, and I realized I created everything I had on that vision board, and it was surprising. I didn't don't think of it that you're locked in, that you have to get there for 5 years, but it gives you something to go for, and it also helps you think about what would it take to get there. So start with the beginning, think about the steps, reach out for help, for mentoring, research and find out what it takes, and then start taking a plan. I need to go this class, I need to get this certification, I need to move toward this role to get there. And by getting involved in professional associations, by taking the certificates, getting the training, you'll be on your way. And as you go along, you may find out, oops, that's not where I want to be in 5 years, but at least you're in the beginning. Your body in motion stays in motion. Newtonian law, you're in movement and you're heading toward your goals.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jamie. It's funny because it makes me think of one of my favorite quotes, and I'm maybe misquoted, but hopefully I have it, where your deep gladness and the world hunger meets. That's how you can kind of set the foundation for your vision or set the foundation of something long term. It's kind of purpose driven. What do you feel is your purpose in this world, and how are you going to contribute to that? So thank you so much, Ashley, for your question. I think a lot of people needed to hear that and get some feedback on it. We have a question from Ashley, and it says, I want to work at a manufacturing company, but all the jobs require experience. What do you suggest? That's a good question.
So I'd love to leap in on this one. This is one that that I get with clients all the time, and people before they graduate, after they graduate, they're dipping their toe into this chaotic job market and getting incredibly frustrated. And that's going to happen to everybody, regardless if you have a ton of experience or very little experience. It's just the way the market is right now. So there are a couple of pieces I think that are helpful. As Marshall described, part of it may be looking a little bit to one side or the other instead of running straight at the door. That can be really hard. But first of all, I would say if there's a position that is at all close, apply. You will never get invited to interview for a job you don't apply for. So one of the things that social researchers find is that one of the reasons there's a pay gap is because women wait till they match every single credential in a job description before we apply. Men, if they've got like 7 or 8 out of 10, they throw their hat in the ring. And it works. It's successful. So it's awesome. I mean, that's something we should all do. So first of all, yeah, it is work to do an application, to make sure your resume is tailored to the position you're looking for, all of those pieces. It takes extra work, but apply to a lot. But also apply to maybe one step below what you're looking for. I was working with a young woman who really wants to get into editing and publishing. And we talked about looking, they have a whole slew at one publishing house of administrative assistant positions. And yes, she's overqualified for that, absolutely. But it's a way to get your foot in the door, to build that community that we've been talking about, to be known by the primaries in that publishing company so that you can then get noticed and move up quickly. And of course, you'll need all of the other credentials to move up quickly. So that's part of that sideways action. So I think, again, if you're targeting something very specific, like a manufacturing company in particular, find a way to get your foot in the door, find a way to meet some folks, be active on their LinkedIn pages and or Facebook pages and asking questions when they're available, like those types of things, any way to get yourself known. Because a cold application on LinkedIn or Indeed is great, but probably less successful than making an introduction of somebody that's already known to them, either virtually or in person.
Yes, thank you so much, Lisa. And to add to your point of the student you were talking to about editing and publishing, Fiverr and Upwork could be great for her to even add some of the skills into that space and get some contracted work to help her build her capacity. So in this instance with a manufacturing company, now granted, I don't know all the details, but maybe there's a skill in that could be you being the outsource or contracted out through those platforms potentially, Ashley. So thank you so much for your question. And then our next question is from Arturo. Would it be recommended to have multiple resumes with specific data for multiple jobs being applied for?
So overall, yeah, you definitely want a resume that is tailored to the field. So if you're kind of not sure where you're going and you have maybe 3 key areas that you're looking into, having a resume that aligns can be helpful. But I think targeting as much as you can, even your next step in a job search, can be helpful, because if you are all over the place, that could be reflected in an interview and things like that as well. And so I think having multiple resumes can definitely be helpful. But also, speaking to, what others have already shared, having that longer term plan of where you want to go, and kind of, drilling down into that, narrowing the focus can be helpful as well. But yes, you should tailor the resume to the area that you're applying for. But if you're way over here with one and you're, clustered here with 2, just think about what you really do want in terms of your long-term goals, because that's also going to make your life easier and make it so that you don't have as many resumes to kind of draft. Any other thoughts that you all have? That definitely feels like maybe it could be a narrowing down opportunity for sure for that person.
I just wanted to say, in addition to that, I often think of the job search process as job dating. I know it sounds funny, but the truth is we need to speak the language of the audience, and isn't having a resume targeted to your audience, you're speaking their language. As I joke, if your date likes to go to Italian, you don't want to give them sushi, so when you give a general resume, I hear students talk about this all the time. I'm not getting any results. Well, you're not speaking their language. You're not feeding their soul with the words and the actions and the things that are important to them. So that connection, what is the connection? We know people are looking for people who are answering the questions they need on the job site for the work and the opportunity. So think, how can you connect? And speaking their language through a specific resume is a way to do it.
Thank you so much, Lacey and Jamie. I think that is really helpful because it helps me, because I was one that had like 10 different resumes around. So thank you so much for giving those specifics. And thank you, Arturo, for your question. And thank you, panelists. All of you have given some really, really, really great information that I hope our participants took notes. And I want to thank the audience for tuning in. And if we did not get to your question, we will do our best to answer them offline. And you can learn more about University of Phoenix Career Services for Life Commitment at phoenix.edu/careers. Also, if you are a student or an alumnus aspiring to explore how your human experience connects with your academic and career journey, be sure to RSVP for Bravely Belong. It's a new virtual cafe offering a safe space to practice self advocacy, turning bewildered conversations in the classroom and in the workplace to those conversations of bravery. Our first session will take place February 28th at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So be sure to register at the link that's referenced on your screen. And thanks again for joining us for today's discussion. Stay tuned for our next Let's Talk About event in April. Have a great one.